what's up, Headspaces? BJ, the brother from the ancient mother, and
That case, I can't get
let duo. We're killing it where it matters. We're talking about something that we felt has been like probably one of the most profound observations of the past 2 years. And I don't know if your hip hop has been noticing, but hip hop in South Africa kind of went through its golden era back in the 2004-2005, which we call the golden era of SA hip hop. And if you look at that period, Dakeza, you find that the development and evolution of hip hop cannot be spoken of in South Africa without mentioning certain people and certain labels. And not every label, because when we talk about the importance of authentic South African hip hop coming to the fore, there are labels who really fundamentally were about that business, who understood the colonial past, the milieu that we were trapped in the context of new urban post-apartheid South Africa, and they realized that there was a need for us to come to really express who we were, at the very same time understand the global nuances of what was beginning to influence us. So you and I have been having conversations about this off the record for a while now, that there's this label which has been sweeping South Africa by storm. I mean, Zulu Mecca, an MC who has come through kind of subtly cracking the gender normativity of rap music, showing us that rappers are rappers, whether they happen to be male or female. Also bringing us an aesthetic that brings us to the core of what blackness, healthy ways of dealing with aggression, and just an open sense of how fluidity and open-mindedness is one thing that hip-hop lacks but needs. We've got Pretty Ugly, who basically started from this place where he was trapped in this schizophrenia of, do I become a Kasi rapper or do I truly flex myself as a lyricist inspired by America, trying to use my looks to leverage in the pop culture spectrum where conventional attractiveness is a thing, and metamorphosizing into like an authentic figure of lyrical revivalism. These are just two of the artists that the label Stay Low has been giving us. And when you look and when you look at Stay Low, the whole idea
but
is,
if you look under the surface,
when we look, we won't get to that. When we look at Stay Low, the real essence of it is we believe in what those who feel is unprofitable is profitable.
Yes.
Stay Low says to us, lyricism, authenticity, a beautiful delicate balance of global flair met with a conscious intentionality about the South African nuances and being really forthright about those. That's the formula.
Yes.
That there's a need, might go as far as to even say a lack of SA rap lyricism. And if you've been watching the Headspace for a while, you'll know that one of the many grievances we have with many hip-hop entrepreneurs is that there's this floating myth that goes about lyricism don't make no money because heads don't buy tickets to shows. And as a result, if you're for the bars, you might as well just be sacrificing the profit, because there's no way you could be both lucrative yet lyrical at the very same time. And this is what makes Stay Low such an important movement. It's almost closer to one label which did that for us in the moment of that golden era of hip-hop. When you think of the golden era of hip-hop, don't you think Zubs? Don't you think Proverb? You know, don't you think Optical Illusion? And did you know that all of those artists were part of one label?
Outrageous record.
So we couldn't help but see this connection and ask the question,
is Stay Low the new Outrageous Records?
It's a good question to ask, because when you look at Outrageous Records, they were fundamentally established to navigate the real authentic expressions of blackness which were going on in the ground roots. Because, you know, pop culture always learns from what's happening on the ground. And even then, we were kind of fresh into our post-apartheid swing. The SABC was fumbling about trying to figure out what worked for younger people. And there were literally people on the ground from different backgrounds and expressions who understood and were part of a growing movement. We've spoken about the importance of Kwaito and how it influenced our kind of hip-hop expression, with people like Mdu and Zola and Magesh, of course, have been influencing the way South African rappers spit. And we've also gone into how that influences the culture of our aesthetic. And Outrageous was really part of this, because Outrageous was a subsidiary of Black Rage Media, which was a media house established by Katakeza going to the Mamandabafano, Maria McCloy, Udzino, and who's the sister? Skosana. And if you want to know a little bit about those people, these were people who, in the context of South Africa and how we got to where we are as a sort of quote-unquote free South Africa, the struggle of how the ANC negotiated with the National Party and how we were navigated into this place where we were the quote-unquote Rainbow Nation, now allowed to move our bodies in spaces where we were previously not allowed to. So this freedom was more or less a freedom of proximity, a freedom to participate in the capitalist enterprise, but not a real deep-rooted freedom of getting the things that were taken from us back. So it was the freedom of, now that the complex of industrialism was kind of forced on our context, we had the freedom of being part of it. The gates were open for us to be businessmen and women in our own right, to be filmmakers in our own right, artists in our own right, in the athletes and sports men and women in our own right, in places where we weren't allowed before. So when we talk about democracy and the advent of freedom in South Africa, that's what we're really talking about, where the proximity to white power was something we were allowed to, not really the actual freedom to repossessing that which was taken from us. So it's important to note, we even have had an episode about this that spoke to how privilege and power is a part of how influence manifests itself in basically all over the world, but particularly in South Africa in a way that's insidious and a lot of people might not notice. That when you look at some of your favorite brands, some of your favorite companies, some of your favorite TV shows, and the black people attached to creating these things, there is a certain privilege attached to it. The privilege of, one, having been part of the liberation movement, which helped kind of usher us into this place, that the people who were involved in this and their families banked and became more lucrative from, yes, sacrificing a lot of time and their lives in being in the struggle. But ultimately what it did is it created a new black elite who were now responsible for sculpting what would become the new black cool. Their children, who they sent to the best schools, who had the kind of access to things that most black youth in the streets didn't have, would be part of a revolution of young youth who, because of your proximity and would be able to open the gates for many others. And I think this is a beautiful thing, because sometimes we tend to point at the ones that have a lot and we call them quote-unquote cheese boys or cheese girls. But the truth is, there have been cheese girls and cheese boys who have had revolutionary ideas and have helped the revolution. When I say the revolution, I mean real black emancipation, us kind of repossessing that which was taken from us. And fundamentally it's about to do with space and time, because the one thing that our so-called freedom didn't do is take back the space that was taken from us, and the time, because time is a thing. But really going into this of how the so-called black, cheese girls and cheese boys we often dismiss, when conscientized to understand their own privilege and how it plays into them being black, have been part of very pivotal shifts in black politics and thus black culture. Now when we talk about Abanafano, Maria McCloy and Zino, this proximity is important. We spoke about young nations also being part of that exile struggle. We spoke of Tumi Khalipha and how his privilege as an MC traveling South America plays into the way we see him today. So I want the headspace first and foremost to understand that this is, when we talk about privilege, we're not talking about people who are cut off from the benefits they have. We're talking about people who have those benefits, but there are people who are privileged and unconscious of how to use that privilege to do better. So in this instance, we celebrate those who were in privileged spaces. We celebrate those who might have had more because they came from families who fought and inherited space and time to do something to empower black people.
Black people.
So when we talk about the Maria McCloys, when we talk about people who've really fundamentally shaped the way we think, when we talk about people who grew up in exile and were part of the liberation movement through its loins, we celebrate them because a lot of the movements that we see today, behind it is the power base that speaks to the struggle and how it manifested itself. So I'm drawing all of this to start the story to say that we can't tell the story of Outrageous Records nor Stay Low without addressing privilege and power. But let's talk about it. Talking about power is impossible if we don't talk about how power is distributed. And in the history of South Africa and the way we chose, or the way our leaders chose to emancipate us, the negotiation angle was taking place. And negotiation came with leaving people who were dispossessed, some pretty much in the same place, many who might have been connected to movements that were in close proximity with kind of being part of that discussion, ended up in places where they could be in places of power. So the only thing I want the headspaces to really get from this is that as South Africans, it's really important, guys, for us to understand the history that goes into a lot of what we see today. And the headspace is about that. The headspace is about us understanding that behind Cassper Nyovest filling up the dome is knowing that a couple of years before that, Rebecca Malope tried doing the same thing. Behind seeing AKA doing wedding songs and being a South African artist who we love to hate, a couple of years ago, there were people who mirrored that same kind of image and angle, that there's nothing new under the sun. And if we are too closely aligned with the immediacy of our pop culture without understanding our history, we're going to lose a lot. And I think what Takeza and I are fundamentally about is journalism that speaks about SA hip-hop from a historical place so that we can understand our reference. So the reason this question is so important is that Outrageous Record fundamentally broke the mold by saying we had to be South African in the ways that we were becoming ourselves. We were becoming ourselves in ways that there was syndicated television and media. So we get American influences. We're beginning to wear Nikes instead of All Stars.
Yes,
we're beginning to choose Timberlands instead of, you know, just regular Parapelam, you know. We're beginning to understand the fact that we're part of a greater black diaspora, which is also in its way experiencing its own nuances of oppression. But we have our own uniqueness that speaks to what we are about. So it kind of saddens me, I don't know about you, Tageza, today when we see a generation of young artists who speak, act, talk like they don't have a whole rich history that makes them very unique. That they're just kind of throwing themselves to wins. I'll call it American wins, where the cultures that they're influenced by are really about globalism and syndication, and there seems to be no real insight into the powerful things that make us South African. And the reason we're taking time to celebrate these two labels is because they're the ones that taught us a lot about what South African being, what big South African means in that moment to this moment. So let's go into Rage. Tell us about Rage, Tageza, and the context and where it came from, and kind of, you know, we talk about origin stories. Let's go into the origin story of Rage.
So Black Rage, actually we made a mistake. It's not Black Rage Media, it's Black Rage Productions. So yeah, it was formed in 1996. These three guys in the 90s. Maria McCloy, Udzino. By the way, tell us Udzino is it his real name? So in the comment section, Udzino. Because who's Dzino?
Hey, as
I call the last name Udzino, and I've tried to Google the guy about where he's coming from.
See, I like the fact that we do this because as we see ourselves as SA hip-hop journalists, so the work we do is about research. So if any of your subscribers, Headspace family, Headspacers, know more of the things we're trying to engage on, holla at us. We're not trying to present ourselves as absolute pundits. This is a conversation. So Tino's real name, holla at us. We're really trying to understand these important parts.
It might be an alias.
It sounds like an alias. I don't see a parent going, he shall be called Tino.
And then also Kutlwano, Skosana.
Shout out to Kutlwano.
Yeah, so in 96, and then they, you know, when it comes to productions that we know, Street Journal.
Come on.
Yeah, come on,
let's talk about this. Black Rage helped usher in a black aesthetic, a black music, a black culture that spoke to what they kind of, they will say, post-apartheid South African youth were into. And when we talk about Abana Bafana Scoop ngekwazi, shout out to GQ Kabeja, hometown. He was, I'll speak for myself and I know a lot of other people.
Obvious. Was
one of the first people who really donned American-inspired influences. But when he spoke his mind, all you felt was the streets of South Africa. And it was shows like these that helped us, the post-apartheid youth, understand that, oh, so it's okay to aspire to be part of the world, but to understand where you come from. This beautiful, delicate balance that, yes, we are born to take over as far as the depths can go, but it's important where we orientate ourselves, because when we orientate ourselves in the foundations of other people's power, we lose touch with our own roots. Scoop and many other people that Bracklage introduced, whether we're talking about Zabs, with how he speaks his...
Because I wanted to go into that.
His roots, okay, you tell too much. Yeah. Go into it. Go into it! That's why I love about these dynamics.
So the production they did most for the TV, Street Journal.
Street Journal. Yeah.
And then I feel like they were on the so we want to have a label. Yeah, hip hop. And they gave the Ilanduga power to Utsi, you know, but you're gonna be part of Ilanduga, whether the CEO, whether because he's the executive there.
That grassroots scouting of where the talent is.
Yeah, so he scouted the Ilanduga and he was the one. I think he's the one who scouted the talent, because remember they got Uzabs from Zimbabwe.
Shout out to Zabs.
Yeah, and then they got the early years Ilanduga
Proverb.
Proverb, and then Ilanduga these four guys.
Optical Illusion. Shout out to Optical Ill, Battle Cat, Golden Shower.
I think Outrageous was formed about in the early 2000s, because their first project out was the Expressions. The Expressions mixtape.
The Expressions mixtape.
Yeah, but it was all mostly
I know we're on the subject of hip hop, but shout out to Outrageous Records for also giving us artists like Pebbles.
Pebbles is also part of
in a time where we were experiencing I'm talking like, you know, millennials.
Yeah.
Our youth was colored by the black confidence of quote-unquote neo-soul artists.
Yes.
With the Erykah Badu's who worked with, you know, the Soulquarian movement, and where MCs like Common and Mos Def kind of got their whole expression.
Yes.
Where the J Dillers come from. And Outrageous seems to be a mirror for that revivalism of black awareness, which was going on in the States in the 90s. Because when you look at the music of a Zabs, a Pebbles, a Proverb, these were artists who understood and were aspiring for pop greatness.
And you must not forget also Elokshini, H2O.
Shout out to Amans, Buffet.
Amans,
these were all artists who were inspiring for pop appeal.
Yes.
Who understood that there's no way that their music couldn't sell, because it spoke to what the youth were feeling.
Yes.
The energy of it, the sonic approach of it. But it was music that had a very deliberate political inclination to it. Zab spoke to a lot of our consciousness and our identity. So did Proverb, and so did Pebbles. So I think it would be remiss of us to speak about Outrageous in comparison to Stay Low, and not talk about how both these labels are doing awareness music in a time where dismissive music is popular. And what do I mean by dismissive music? The escapist trend of capitalism places music in this place where you listen to music to forget about all the things that float in your consciousness. You kind of listen to music to jump into this world where nothing really matters but the dance floor. But there's a room and a place for music that helps you contemplate, helps you make sense of, reconcile, entangle to you in a way that doesn't feel boggled down, but it makes it feel fun. It makes you really want to know more about yourself, your history, your power, and have artists who help you explain or help understand the emotions that you're going through. So the reason this episode for me is so important is both of these labels were making awareness art in a time where being aware was not being encouraged or publicized. We live in an era right now where we look at the biggest artists, to be quite frank, they're not about turning back and looking at where our country is.
It's about turn up.
You know, it's about, let's pop bottles,
Yeah.
let's do everything to kind of forget, or rather not focus too much on the things, the ills, quote unquote, that might be going on in ourselves or in the general country. I've never heard a single rapper have a load shedding song, but yet there's something we experience. I've never heard a single rapper talk about what's going on in the presidency or the movements, and yet we say hip hop is about empowerment. It's really sad for me, as Ufije, the brother from the Angel Mother, that we're going into a time now where capitalism feels so comfortable in taking hip hop and making it commercial because it knows that very few artists are about awareness. So the reason Stay Low is important and it feels like a distant relative of Outrageous is because these were musical labels, media labels in the pop scope. We're not talking about some fringe movements that nobody knew.
Just before we get to the next
talking about real money.
Next part, when it comes to his sound scope, I like the fact that they also did the same thing because Outrageous, the guy who was in charge of the sound scope was Battle Cat.
Battle Cat.
Yeah, bro.
Shout out to Battle Cat.
Because if you go, I know we're gonna go to Stay Low, but if you go to Stay Low, you've got this guy called Shooter Combs, and that guy Herc cut the lights.
So I mean, I think it would be pretty natural to say.
And Zuchi, yeah.
Shout out to Zuchi, shout out to Shooter Combs.
Yeah.
But I think to kind of conclude it, it would be natural to say that both of these movements are movements that remind us that popular doesn't have to be at our expense.
Yeah.
So think about that. Think about that really deep. If it's popular, it doesn't have to be at your expense. And what does your expense mean? It doesn't have to rid you or take you away from your roots, your history, and the actual access to the information that really could empower you. The story goes on. If it's popular, it doesn't have to be at your expense. And the reason that's important, Takeza, is that we tend to look at popularity as something that doesn't anchor us in our politics of empowerment. Just because, you know, a lot of artists who are popular don't speak forthcomingly about the issues that we experience, it doesn't mean there's no profit in being an artist who cares about those issues. So I think the actual heritage that Stay Low takes from Outrageous is that through people like Maria, Kutlwano, and Sino, who were a black youth in that moment, who were caught in the intersection of being the ones who inherited what the liberation movement had gotten, but yet were still connected to the past of what was happening. They took their traumas and found ways of empowering us, ways of saying, listen, there's a beckoning, beautiful thing going on with black youth. It's the language that we express ourselves. Italia, twistamto, you know, there is the fashion that's going on with Upansula and the evolution of that and where we're taking it. And at the very same time, we got this hip-hop thing we love. We got this jazz thing we love. We've got a whole American diaspora of black people who we really look at as our parallel mirror. How can we take from those people through honor and do that in ways that remind and empower us in our own corners and crevices as South Africans? Really, Outrageous did that, and really it was an outrageous thing to do.
It was outrageous, especially at that time.
And I think that's what expresses the name, is that in a time where you would be safer in betting in what was not really trying to question norms, in what was not really trying to become pro-black, in what was trying not to really kind of ruffle the feathers of the established white power, they did all of that.
Imagine, look, through Outrageous, Uzabs had a song that got banned, Who Get Out.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and that was in the early
This is what I'm talking
2006.
about.
Yeah, you were in the middle 2000.
A proverb, we're talking about what it means to be a rapper and American. Truth is revealed. One of my favorite hip hop joints because it speaks to this whole thing that I can be inspired by America and still be an African, not in the typical ways that being African has been presented, where it's the drum and the beats and the bushes and this whole Congo Mandingo man who crawls out of the jungle, which is really a dismissive and racist archetype created by whites of Africa. Proverb and many artists in Outrageous were speaking to this whole thing that
optical ill talking about trying to authenticity to see Sepi America that fuck this whole hip hop shit.
We need to move it up. Tours overseas.
Yeah.
We need to book them up. So there's a social commentary that swims through the narrative of Rage in everything they did. The publications, the TV shows. Shout out to Scoop, love you, bro. The music. Shout out to Zubs. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to Pebbles. Ooh, PCC, we miss you.
Yeah, we miss you.
These were all people who laid a foundation that I feel trickled into Von Theo. Let's go to Stay Low. Let's go to how Stay Low started, because I feel like the headspaces right now will want to know, okay, we've laid the foundation for the Outrageous and how it popped up and how in the peak of golden era SA hip hop, it kind of took advantage of the moment and showed us what was really real and going on amongst us. How do we now come to the era of Stay Low? This is the era of Ricky Rick. Remember, this is the era of AKA. This is the era of Casper. This is the era of Questa. This is the era of KO. This is an era where, for the most part, millennials did what they did, but they still didn't they still didn't resonate beyond just being commercial fodder. So how does Stay Low change things? This is that chapter. Takeza, give us the origin story to Stay Low real quick for the masses.
Hey, it's complex. I thought it was easy, yeah. Like going through Stay Low and all that, and then I found out that Stay Low is
But wait. I feel where you're going. Now guys, when you look at Stay Low, the founder is Von Theo. Shout out to Von Theo. We've been kind of following Von for a while because we're both fans of the culture, practitioners of the culture, and the one thing Von and the movement is doing with Stay Low is that they're reviving lyricism, reviving awareness in art, reviving an unapologetic political stance to the way that we do things. And when I say political stance is I will empower myself regardless of the pop tropes that are going on. I'll move adjacent to that. Pretty Ugly, Zulu Mecca, name the other artists.
Oh, there are many. Uzuchi.
Shout out to Zuchi Kokto.
Lord Cares, which is you could say the new version of Pebbles.
Oh, Pebbles, doing the trap soul vibe.
And then there's also this guy. Mars Baby.
Shout out to Mars Baby. Trap soul vibe too. You always did your singing ass niggas.
So those are the artists when it comes to the musical part. But when you go to the production,
before we go, the musical part is so important to mention because every single one of those artists are taking what is now prevalent in American culture and presenting to us in ways that feel directly involved with what's going on to us as South Africans. Soil, Zulu Maker's project,
Wept,
and all of these other artists speak to the current predicament of the internal condition of South African youth. A lot of South African music right now, you as hip hop, you motherfuckers are not speaking to the internal condition. You're speaking to the bottles, you're speaking to the bitches, you're speaking to the money, but very few artists have the courage to speak to the internal conditions of our people, the nervous conditions. Shout out to Stay Low for making music which deliberately speaks to our internal condition. I reviewed both albums, Soil, Wept, and the one thing I found, Mud, is the previous. Shout out Pretty Ugly, love you, bro. We sipping something, so I might be a little blurred with the references. But the internal referencing is what matters for me. Stay Low, just like Outrageous, says, fuck what's going on right now, it is important to go within. And by going within, we will be able to be profitable. That there is money and there is doorways to lure corporates into consciousness. When I say consciousness, it's not in this bland way that other people are unconscious, but it's saying that own who you are and understand the origins thereof. You know what I'm saying? You can be whatever, but do you know where the essence of where you are truly comes from? So it's that kind of thinking.
And also another thing, I know someone is going to say, but Uzuchimos is what you call
his trap.
But if you listen to his anxiety,
like you listen to anxiety one and two, it's this internal
thing. So he talks about
talking about guys who right now
issues
is talking about mental health as a rapper openly, theming
he
their
might
project.
be doing it in some scope that is more familiar to your trap people. If you listen closely.
And that's revolutionary.
Yeah.
Somebody wouldn't say Zuchiko Dope is a revolutionary because they see him, you know, with his braids and his jewelry and everything, and when you about Travis Scott. But no, it's deeper than that.
Yes.
That what you see in the veneer of pop culture is a young man trying to navigate his own mental state in the new South Africa with all the problems that come from the eras that have not been resolved. So the one thing that we have to really look at and celebrate is that, guys, making music for the internal experience is not only profitable, it's potent, and it's really the core of how you will be able to liberate ourselves. Because I'm all for music that helps us dwell into the happier notes of our lives. But if we do that at the expense of music which seeks to reflect, all we're going to be is slaves to whatever white capitalist industrialists want us to be. So Stay Low, Outrageous are all in this anti-dismissive trope, which brings us into something a little bit more considered. But what makes Stay Low special and also very akin to Outrageous is that it's not just music. The same way that Outrageous was bringing us TV, art, aesthetic and fashion, and Maria McCloy till this day is out there showing us beautiful African prints, being part of PR and journalism in all its ways, writing articles and revealing things to us that always bring us to the inclination of where we are as South Africans. Stay Low is doing the same things with the freestyles.
The freestyle, the no paperwork.
With no paperwork.
Yes.
Stay Low.
And they're not. I like the fact that they're not focusing on their own artists, because the first episode was Tyler Linkman, and they he's like the equivalent of what? Who?
Of Mac Miller.
Of Mac Miller. Yeah.
You know, I love that. It's speaking to race. It's speaking to power.
Episode 2 is Tyson Siabateli.
You feel what I'm saying? And that's where Stay Low is. Stay Low is saying to us, the youth know what's going on.
Yeah.
So if they have the opportunity to freestyle, to speak their minds, we'll know a little bit of what's really up behind the brands, behind the skirt.
Yeah.
Then we know what's really driving this engine. You know what I'm saying? So, but I love the fact that these are not just labels in that they sign musical artists, but the same way that Outrageous was dedicating itself to changing the scope of the black aesthetic. I didn't even know that Stay Low had an actual fine artist as well. Talk to us about that.
Speaking of Ilanduga, a visual artist, they signed a guy called Tumi Khalipha.
Okay.
So when I went through, he's a contemporary art, so painter the guy. Obviously,
to find art.
Yeah, so going deeper, I found out that the artwork for Umad and Soil for Pretty Ugly was actually done by Utumi.
You don't? Yo, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, Utwa is that one of those aggressive art, aggressive and his own approach.
We check the video out and we'll probably put the link
on the description. So that, as introduced, because that's why he is announced on the Stay Low channel. Yeah,
shout out. So it gets to this convergence of the ultimate moment where we say, hip-hop heads, lovers of the culture, not just rap music, lovers of graph, lovers of DJing, lovers of rap in its core purpose to inspire the party, lovers of each and every facet, the entrepreneurship. Hip-hop is fundamentally something that grew out of the need to empower ourselves, and it doesn't have to necessarily be attached to ideology and the deliberate stance of being revolutionary, but it does have to empower, because all hip-hop has empowered by expressing a part of what we all feel is the mirror of the black experience in many of its dimensions. And not every label, in fact most labels, most movements, most crews, most super groups which subsequently means most artists seem to subject themselves to the rules of pop culture.
Yeah.
They say, instead of speaking to my unique story, instead of talking to my community, the best thing to do is become some kind of billboard for brands to attach themselves to. Is to become some kind of vehicle for capitalism to further itself using black culture.
You
understand? And there's money in that. But what we're saying is that shit ain't hip hop. It's pop.
It's pop.
That's what pop culture is for, guys. It's an engine for capitalism.
Going back to the fact that most of you all are rapping because you're famous.
And it's fine.
I can't be wrong.
It's fine. But then don't call yourself hip hop. You are pop. You are a pop rapper.
Yeah.
So the reason why Stay Low, Outrageous are so important, and they are two parallel moments that we must look at as extensions of the same spirit, is that here come people in the context of all this pop nonsense that tells us to just lap into all these brands. They say you can do more than that. You can lap into these brands by being you. You can introduce these brands to important parts of the culture of what it means to be young, black and South African in this moment in time. So the reason why we need to tell these stories of how Outrageous was founded and how it led to the same impulse that made a Stay Low is that we need to understand that as complex and nuanced as it is, because in going into the roots of Stay Low, beneath Von Thiel and the partners that make up Stay Low is a very ironic story of how it is a subsidiary of the Stain Group.
Stain, which is
Stain attaching to the the multi-millionaire Doe Stain of Stain City and South African big white monopoly capital. His sons are part of a group which funds what is really expressing blackness in its expression. And we're not saying that Von Thiel and Stay Low is a horse being pulling the chariot of whiteness yet again.
Nah.
What we are saying is that when we talk about how to be successful, and we have a video on there, we'll put the link in the description, what making it really means.
Yeah.
It's a process.
It's a process, yeah.
And this process is about understanding the politics you're playing in. Shout out to Von Thiel for understanding that the politics we play in is about understanding not only what you're about, but the proximity of who you are around. Because there are people who do have bags of money lying around, who are fans of hip-hop, who are fans of lyricism, even if they happen to be white, Afrikaner, and the poorest Boer of Boer that Boeramach can breed. But they are also lovers of the culture.
Yes.
And if these people are people who you're in proximity with, and you can engage on how to empower each other mutually, this is how these great movements happen. And when we study into the core of where everything we love comes from, we found that deep into it is this constant negotiation that we have to play to white privilege, to capitalist privilege, to get aspects of ourselves out there. Because again, we will need the thorn of capitalism to remove the thorn of capitalism in our fort. I think there's no way to be anti-capitalist other than using aspects of capitalism to do it. So we've been doing numerous episodes on hip-hop and the economy. We've been doing numerous episodes on hip-hop and consciousness, hip-hop and art, privilege and power and politics. And what it all goes down to is movements like Stay Low and Outrageous are here to get. Here's what I feel the legacy speaks of. It can be popular, but it doesn't have to be popular at your expense. So think about that. Next time you listen to Aries, next time you listen to Nasty C, are you listening to these artists at your expense? Are they empowering you about things that truly bring you to the core of who you are and how you can break free or possibly navigate more empoweringly within capitalism? That's all I gotta say. Shout out to Stay Low, shout out to Outrageous for telling us this, for showing us this secret, this life hack that guys, we can be pop, but it doesn't have to be at our expense as black people. What do you guys think?
My last say, look, be original, bang, that's all. authenticity. You know, it's that's how it is. That's all.
So from THA is VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. Please talk to us in the comment section. Do you believe that really we can truly be pop in ways that are not at our expense? Do you know anything about Stay Low and Outrageous that we didn't mention on this?
Yes.
Also, I really hope Maria McCloy and all the other founding fathers, including you, Maria, your father, Mutata. I hope they watch this and are empowered and, you know, can conversate with us and teach us about some of the things we might not and definitely could have never known, because these were their lives and we're just telling the story because we're inspired.
Because we would love to sit with these guys.
Please.
We've got so many questions.
If interviews can happen, let them happen. But yeah, Headspace for the power, for the culture, the most poignant South African hip hop podcast. This has been the episode. Is Stay Low the new outrageous records? Either way, I think Stay Low is an outrageous record label, and I do think that there's power in that. We should probably take Proverb in this. I know you're allowed to say, because he had a line where he talks about, it's no wonder I left Rage. We want to know why you left Rage. Because Rage was important. But shout out to all the artists who contributed to the history and the power of the legacy that we have the honor and the benefit to speak of. I'm Vijay, the brother from the ancient mother, and I will always annoy you with these narratives that connect hip-hop with power. Because without power and empowerment, is it truly hip-hop? What you gotta say?
If you don't subscribe, we gaga.
We gaga and we slaves of capitalism. So what's up, VJ the brother from the ancient mother. It's been an honor and pleasure throughout these years, to really give you South Africa's most poignant hip-hop content. Now, with December, hello December, we're celebrating with hip-hop heads. It's the one room Headspace Cypher, 30th of December, 6 o'clock. If you love hip-hop, if you love that boom bap, that punch, that slam, that rap, if you think you can rap for us, you stand a chance to win an artist EP package. What does that mean? It means 3 songs of your own choosing, mixed mastered, recorded by us, album art provided. Basically, you get to have that jump start that I think a lot of rappers would want to have when putting themselves across out there in the scene. But anyways, we're celebrating hip-hop, we're celebrating the culture. It's the Headspace doing it for you. So please, 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 those who have the time, the energy, the willingness, the fire for it, catch us front and center, live and direct at the place to be. Much love, keep supporting the Headspace, keep subscribing. We got this far because of you, and we just want to celebrate it all. We only got one life, and we live this one life in the context of the culture, in all its beauty, in all its glory. Love y'all.